Mr. Neal Hall, I should say Dr. Neal Hall. Welcome to the Future Ancients podcast. How are you, man?
Finding you. It's good to see you again.
You too, man. Been a long time.
Long time. What's Bali, Indonesia?
Bali, Indonesia. Ubud Riders Festival.
Ubud, yes.
2012, I think, maybe?
Somewhere around here.
13? Somewhere around there, man. You've been on a crazy journey with your poetry since then. That was your first book of poetry that you were releasing then?
Yes, Nigger for Life. Yeah.
And maybe we should start there. Tell us a little bit about that journey of becoming, I mean, you already were a poet to a certain extent, but becoming a public poet, of publishing your first book. How did that happen?
Actually, the book came about not as an attempt to write a book. It was it's like a diary of some things that were going on at the time. And one of my favorite English teachers taught poetry. So I just felt the best way to express myself was in that form of writing. But I was writing about what was going on. I had 4 years of Cornell. I was a pre-med major. Prior to going to Cornell, never had chemistry, never had biochemistry, never had organic chemistry, never had anatomy. So I'm taking all this stuff for the first time at an Ivy League school, playing football, running indoor track and outdoor track. And this is not to brag, but this is the setup where all this was taking me. And then I went from there to medical school. And then from there, I did a eye surgery residency, ophthalmology at Harvard. Graduated, always was taught that the way out, one of the major ways out for people of color was in education. And I pursued that path faithfully. Only to find out that no matter what we achieved, no matter what I achieved, that I would always be first and foremost a nigger for life. And that was devastating. It was just devastating. You know, there's examples that, you know, how that manifests itself. But it was like a perfume, an odor. It would precede you. And alert everyone that a nigger was coming, irrespective of, you know, your academic accomplishments. I was always defined first by the color of my skin, and then had to sort of work through and beyond that to try to move ahead. That was very painful. So this book sort of came out of all that. And again, I didn't write it as a book. When I shared it with some friends, they encouraged me to make a book out of it. That's how I got started.
You'd been writing poems dealing with this realization as a form of therapy for yourself, in a way, as a form of dealing with it?
Oh, absolutely. I think you have to work things out in your own mind, in your own soul, before you can begin to move forward, before you can even begin to help the other people work it out. You got to work it out in your own mind. You got to, I always say, with this formal education, the only thing that a formal education really does for you is three things: teach you how to read, write, and do arithmetic. And with those three things, you have an obligation to go out and find the truth for yourself. For all the bullshit and lies and brainwashing that you receive in your formal education, you have to go out and find the truth for yourself. And if you cannot find the truth for yourself, you have to create your own truths. And so that's what this whole process did for me. You know, just in my head, dealing with all these things, I learned to form my own truth that protected me from the lies of the world. And poetry helps me.
Yeah, and I remember when we first met, we got along straight away, and we were hanging out in Ubud, and we were
Yeah.
kicking it in a couple of cafes and bars around there in between events, and we sat down one day and we had this really kind of in-depth political conversation about the planet. And you very clearly taught me something that day that has stayed with me. And you asked me the question, what is the most effective way of political change? And I can't remember what my answer was, but it was probably a long-winded, kind of slightly misguided, it could be a bit of this and it could be a bit of that and it could be a bit of this. And I was really, and I still am a student, we have to stay as students, I think.
Yes.
But you really very clearly pointed out that economic violence is the best form of pushing for social change. And that was, many years ago now, but I know that your position hasn't changed necessarily. And I'm wondering if we can unpack that a little bit as to why that's still your perspective and why that relates to what's going on now.
Well, one of the reasons why it's something that I truly believe in is because it's the one thing we have not done yet in our fight and struggle for freedom. Everything else, we prayed, we've accepted their religions, their politicians, their lies. We've done everything except build our economic powerhouse. Okay, but I start back from, how did all this come about? It came about because of economics. We were brought as slaves to America and around the world, not because we were inferior, but because we were slaves. Cheap source of labor. It was about economics. It's always been about economics. So if it was economics that enslaved us, it has to be economics that frees us. It has to be our economics that does that. And we have advanced at least far enough now that collectively, worldwide, we as people of color and people who really want to work together as one, we have enough collective economics to change the world if we spend it correctly. If we stop wearing it on our ass, those assets on our ass, and we spend the money to change their behavior, then we'll be much further along than we are right now. And the oppressor teaches us to, one of the ways to press ahead, if you allow me to say that, against them is to try to change their hearts and their minds. And you can't change someone who doesn't have a heart and no mind to change. We can only change their behavior. You can hate me, you can dislike me, but if I can get your foot off my neck, literally now, by the way we spend our money, then in essence, we freed ourselves. And that is the message they don't want us to know. They would rather see us out in the street marching, looting, protesting, sitting in, instead of just quietly, collectively saying, we're not going to spend our money with you. And it's always been there. It's always been in front of us. And some years back, I spent a lot of time reading and listening to Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. And what I realized is that the Montgomery Bus Boycott, even though the great Martin Luther King wrapped it in this religious victory, was no more than an economic victory. When we stopped riding the bus and going downtown, spending money in white businesses, when we stopped that, that's really what changed things. White businesses were losing money, the bus company was losing money, and they changed their behavior and said, hey, well, you can sit anywhere you want. It has always been right in front of us.
And it was almost immediate from memory. And same with the conversation that we had when we were in Ubud. I think you gave me the example of Coca-Cola in communities. and people
Yes,
just deciding that's it. We're just not going to
that's
buy
it.
Coca-Cola anymore. And all of a sudden, their programs changed. They started
That's
including more Black people in their higher levels of leadership, and it was almost overnight that the
That's
economics
right.
made the flip.
That's right. And Jesse Jackson led that against Coca-Cola. Overnight, Coca-Cola started changing its hiring practice. The dealerships that they were allowing for blacks, all that opened up. So the answer is right in front of us. We're just too blind to see it because we're taught to fight them by the way they tell us to fight them. And another example is anytime there's a hot mic and someone says nigga and get caught, the next day they're coming back crying uh, before the American audience. They're crying because their sponsors' money are backing out. And the sponsors are backing out because, oh, we don't want to offend the niggas so that they continue to buy our stuff. It's, our struggle is intimately tied to our economics. And we have enough economics now to change the world if we just spend it with one mind together. And remember in doing that we are no better than the next man. And if we lose sight of that, we run the risk of becoming what they are to us.
Yes, I wonder about that when it comes to the conversation about economics and about, you know, becoming billionaires and these conversations around the Jay-Z's and the Oprahs of the world, and whether there is still in that, you know, deep striving for capitalism still, but capitalism owned by a different group of people, if there are still victims in that in other parts of the world, in Central and South America that are producing certain products, slave labor that happens in other parts of the planet, you know, to be able to do that, but to be able to do that consciously, that still, you know, can prove to the world that it can be done without severe victims, or at least, you know, figure out a new path.
And that's why I say we have to understand that it's economics as a weapon to free not just ourselves, but everyone. And so we have to approach this from the right heart, why we are doing this. You know, they say money is the root of all evil. Well, that's bullshit. That is. Man is the root of all evil. Money is just one of the tools that a bad man can use to exact his evil. But a good man can use that tool to do things good for man. And so we must not look at economics as this bad thing. It's man that is bad. But if you have a good heart, we need the power to manifest that goodness out in the world. It's like having a brand new car. You can have a great heart, brand new car, but if you don't have the gas to run the car, you're going nowhere. The medium of exchange of power, and we need power in the world, is economics. When we go into a store, what gives us the power to walk out with a candy bar and not be, you know, stopped for stealing is the economics that we have in our pockets. That's the medium of exchange of power. It's how we use that power. And I think we have the heart. We have to have the heart to use it correctly.
And how does that translate into your day-to-day consumption? Like, do you think about this often in terms of like, well, I'm just not going to buy that. I'm not going to purchase this thing. I mean, I know that a lot of people can be quite fascist in a way that they try and implement their own ideologies and push other people to be the same. A lot of people that are maybe vegan or that believe in, you know, certain things, they're just like, never buy this, never buy that. And I've found that, yes, I understand that, but there's also room for us to make mistakes and observe our mistakes as we make them, to learn from them, to connect with them, to know that You know, even though I bought a plastic bottle of water today that's owned by Coca-Cola, I didn't have many choices at that store, and I, you know, needed a drink. But for the rest of the year, I don't do it, and I don't go to McDonald's. You know, like, how do we weigh up all of these things that we're doing to move into a good direction?
Yeah, it's bigger than just what I do in terms of deciding what not to buy and what to buy. It's much bigger than that. And if we're looking for change, I'm looking for quick, big, massive change. And so at first it's about a philosophy, an understanding of the importance of economics, and then finding like-minded people that can begin to create that understanding to a critical mass of people who then, as one, say, we're all are not going to buy this one thing because they are not treating us right. That's the point we got to get to. So it's bigger than my individual buying habits. It's got to be our collective buying habits, understanding that economics is the key here.
So you're saying it's more about having a certain movement towards a certain boycott process, towards a certain company, until it changes its process and changes the way it supports things politically.
Absolutely. And you know, all you got to do is one or two big companies, make an example of them, and everyone will fall in line. That's all we have to do.
I saw that online. I think it was T.I., the rapper from Atlanta. He had a petition or a movement or a call out that July 7 was going to be a national boycott day of not buying anything, for all people of color in the United States to not purchase anything for 1 or 2 days. And I think he'd calculated that equates to over $1 billion of revenue that gets lost when that happens. Do you think it's enough to just say we're just not going to purchase one day? Or do you think it's, like you're saying, more important to be like, we're going to not purchase Adidas, we're going to not purchase Nike, we're going to not purchase something from Amazon until they improve their workers' rights? Do you think that's more powerful?
I think it's more powerful to understand how this is a tool, a weapon that we can use. A weapon of economic violence, that they can't shoot us in the street, they can't hang us, they can't jail us, they can't put us down on the ground and put their knees on our neck because we're not buying their stuff. This is a philosophy. This is an understanding. So, and once you have that, once it's ingrained, then we can do that. And we can do it every day.
Yeah.
So it's almost like we have to start teaching ourselves and our communities and our kids from day one that this is what we need to do. This is essential. This economic weaponry that we now have access to collectively. But use it the right way. Use it for the good of all of us.
Powerful stuff, man. I 100% believe that. And there's movements in Australia as well around buying from only Black businesses in Australia, about, obviously donating where possible, and about using our economies and using our finances to vote really every day, like you're saying. And I think that something interesting that has come out of all of this as well is that just today or last night, Australia's Supreme Court deemed it illegal to get out and protest today, as people are doing in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter and Aboriginal Lives Matter movements in Australia and in the US and abroad. And they're making it illegal because they're saying that it's risky for COVID cases for people to be outside and protesting. And I guess that this is a good answer to that. I'm not saying people shouldn't protest. I think actually them saying that is going to make more people go and protest than ever. I think the crowds are going to be massive today. But I do think that there's something that goes beyond either posting black squares on your Instagram or protesting 1 day a year or 2 days a year. And that is what you're saying, this economic violence that can really shift society. But I guess it's about educating people around that and getting the information out around that. I don't know how.
And that's why. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
No, please. I was wondering if you had experience with that or what you would say about that.
About what in particular?
About getting the information out to people to let them know that this is a weapon.
Well, that's what I try to do. That's, part of my poetry is not only talking about the problem, but saying, okay, this is what I think the solution is. And it's always been there. We've just been, it's been kept from us. But this is the answer. Yeah, Australia say you can't protest. They don't want you out in the street marching under the guise of the COVID. Well, you can sit at home and not buy. I mean, we have marched enough. We have protested enough. That was a weaponry that worked at some point. And now we must move to the real weapon, the one that we've been kept from. At one time in the past, collectively, we didn't have enough economics. Even if we understood this, we didn't have enough economics to make an impact, to change behavior. But now we do collectively. And we can do it without having to be subjected to their manipulation of laws or orders with respect to our actions. Okay? They can't jail you for not buying sneakers collectively.
Yeah. It'd take us all to go against all of the messaging of all of the millions and billions of dollars of marketing that has been fed to most of us. I mean, I don't watch or engage with any of that anymore, but it would take a huge feat of consciousness for people, not saying that it's not impossible, but for people to ignore the 20,000 times in their lifetimes that they've encountered an advertisement for Versace or for some label that they don't, that they long to afford, and for them to lose that dream that's been fed to them to one day afford a Versace, handbag or whatever it is, and to drop that, even though it's been fed to them so clearly and so strongly for so long. And it's just so much a part of the culture. I remember when I was in two places actually that I think I've been advertised the most to is New York and Singapore, where every single kind of angle that you turn, from the back of the seat in the taxi there's a TV screen advertising something to me. You get out of the taxi door has an advertisement on it. You turn around, there's 5 shops, there's a billboard, there's there's someone walking, like in Singapore, there's young students walk around with billboards on their backs, like that's their hourly job, 12 Singapore dollars an hour to walk around and be an ad. So to go against all of that is to really reconnect with the self, to reconnect with the heart.
My answer to that is I think about the first slave who decided to run. And if we use the analogy of the whip as a way of advertising, controlling your mind, your behavior, that was some massive advertising, okay? Getting the crap beat out of you, being treated like dirt. But that first slave who decided that was enough, they overcame all that to say, I'm going to run. I'm out of here. And I just say, if that first slave can do that, then this is nothing for us. This is nothing. And so for me, and a couple of years I told my friends about this when, things like what happened to Mr. Floyd happened, in years past. I would always say, we're not hurting enough. We don't have enough pain yet. And until we get to that level of pain, unfortunately, we're going to continue to fall victim to what you just talked about. When we get enough pain, then we'll make that move. We'll make that move to move away from all that brainwashing. But I always go back to, anytime I feel like, oh, I think of that first slave who said, that's it, I'm running. And they ran. We need to be like that first slave again and say, that's it.
That's it. Do you think that that's happening? You think that's what this is, this moment,
No,
even though it is full of protests and it is full of,
no,
different
no,
ways of protest?
no, no, I don't think that's it. I just think, for some people, um, it's popular to hop on the banner. You got the liberals that are out there, and I don't get too political about liberals or conservatives, but you got people who hop on because, they feel guilty and this is the right thing to do now in light of their appalling silence. So they want to be heard now. No, this is, until we understand that it's really about economics. This is not a race war. This is not a gender war. This is not a religious war. This is not an ethnic war. This is what it's always been, an economic war. Race, gender, religion, those are the tools, the weaponry of the economic war. They got us focusing on that when they know it's an economic war. As soon as we switch and realize that it's an economic war, then we will come to the battle with the right weaponry, and that's our collective economics. And it'll be far easier to do that collectively than that first slave that had to run and run and run with fear, dogs chasing them, the fear of being caught and having their flesh ripped off their back again. So, no,
we're not there yet.
We're not there yet.
Hmm.
We're not there yet.
Who do you see doing it the right way then? Who do you see out there that you are aligned with, that when you see them make a move that's an economic one, where you go, yeah, that makes sense? And is it, if it's not a race war or a gender war and an ideological war, it's an economic war, does that then break down some of those boundaries for you? And do you see other people of color from other backgrounds also doing the right thing with their money, where you kind of go, yeah, he gets it or she gets it?
See, some of my friends, we have these conversations and we try to do things like this on our small level, hopefully to build, and so that our light can shine and other people can see it and emulate it or join in. But it's sort of in a crazy kind of way. I always tell a lot of my friends, if I was in a real war, the people I'd want to hang out with are the rappers. The people who did the most with the least.
Mm.
They understood it was about economics. Now, they may not spend the economics in a way in which I think would, in the way in which we could change behaviors so that we all can be freer. But they understand that it's about economics. They understand that. If you look at some of the athletes, now it's about being, the best, a Pro Bowler. Yeah, there's the economics, but they don't understand that it's really about the economics. At least some of them, I shouldn't say all of them. But to me, the rappers have done the most with the least. Mm. But if you look at some of these formally educated people who have the most, they have done the least, because they have bought more into the lies than those people who are not so formally educated. And for me, much of formal education is miseducation and misinformation. Mm. So.
Amazing. I love that idea that you want to hang with the people that do the most with the least. I feel like I have a few friends around that I've seen really shine. And in this time, I'm just being like, you know what, man, in the apocalypse, I'm going to call these 5 people. That's going to be my crew. One's a mad chef and he's built these restaurants from nothing, you know.
That's right.
And another, yeah,
That's
like
right.
some other poets and a couple of, you know, really good gardeners that can build some shit, build some houses. Couple, you know, some more artists, you know, like some people
Yes.
that have built from nothing, that have come from really difficult times.
That's right.
When difficult times fall upon them, they face it with a smile and
They
come out the
face
other
it.
end.
That's right. That's
Whew.
right.
That's just like, man, that's the apocalypse crew. We're
Yes.
going to start the
Yes.
community right now.
Yeah.
Do you think that's why you turned to poetry? That you'd gotten so far in your career and you'd still been treated, you know, without dignity in those halls that you thought would erase in some way that kind of prejudice. Do you think that's why poetry kind of became powerful for you? Because it really is an act of making something from nothing.
Well, two things. I think poetry was a way to speak to myself, to have a dialogue with myself. You know, I got X, Y, and Z. What's going on? I got to think this through. So poetry allowed me to do that. The other thing I learned as I went on in the area of poetry was that what didn't necessarily turn to poetry, I was always a poet. I turned away from poetry because someone told me and defined for me what success was. Someone told me if I was a doctor, I'd be successful. And so I bought their dream, their lie for me. I was always a poet. I remember when I was a kid, I was so sensitive. I was sensitive about everything. You know, and poets have this level of sensitivity that's just, I mean, you know, I don't have to tell you. I always tell you, you're my poet, you know. Your stuff is just great. I mean, so you have that level of sensitivity and feeling that, you know, something hits you and it haunts you. You got to do something with it. You got to play with it in your head and make sense out of it. And then when you make sense out of it, you hope. Then you memorialize it on paper, you know, to live, have a place to live, to go back to it, to relive it, to have it re-energize you, or to share it with the world so they can do whatever they want with it. But when I'm doing my poetry around the world, I tell people, and I apologize ahead of time, I say, you know, I don't write for you. I write to free me first. I'm sharing it with you, but I write for me, to free me, my mind, my thinking, to undo all the brainwashing that I was subjected to all those years. And it is freeing. You know, going back to that sort of first slave metaphor again, someone said to me, when is freedom? When is freedom? And I thought about it and I said to myself, freedom is that first moment in your head when you say, I want to be free. No more. I'm not going to do it anymore. I need to be free. Now, the next step is becoming free, working towards that. And it may take you days, weeks, months, years to get the shackles off. But that moment you set it in your head, you were free. You were free. You just needed to do what it takes to get the chains off.
It reminds me of a story from my family. The Nazis in World War II invaded my grandmother's village and her relatives' villages in the area. And the village, before they arrived at my grandmother's village, we had relatives there, and they rounded up all the men and killed all the men in the village and set fire to a church hall or a school hall with all the women and children inside. And they eventually escaped because a soldier made a decision, a very interesting decision. A soldier that I think was Swedish, that was an ally with the Germans at the time, decided to open the door of the church hall, of the hall where all the women and children were in, because he couldn't bear to see them all die as well as all the men that were killed by gunfire not so far away. And so he, at that moment, was also kind of free. He was like, even though I'm in this military, even though I came here to fight and I believe in something, I don't believe in this. And so he opened the doors, and I think he was killed by his allies, by the Nazis that he was, working with, because he disobeyed orders and set these women and children free. And then the Nazis came down the mountain to my grandmother's village, and they rounded up all the men there, and everybody thought that the same thing was about to happen. And they lined them all up and they marched them to an area where they were intending on executing them if these two German soldiers didn't arrive back in time. They would say, well, then they've been killed by the Greek soldiers, by the Greek kind of guerrilla fighters in the mountains. So we need a reprisal. So we're going to kill all the men in this village for that. And as they were marching the men to that place, my grandmother's brother, who was about 16 at the time, was among them, along with his father. And of all the men that were lined up to go and march and be executed, he decided at a certain moment to run. And so he had a moment where he's like, fuck this. Like, I'm not gonna, you know what I mean? I'm not gonna end up like what happened in the village before this. And so he ran, and they shot him as he was running, and they kind of left him, and he stumbled around hiding in the village for a number of hours, and eventually got back to his house, and they took him to the hospital, and he passed away in the hospital. But the men that they'd taken, eventually they waited and waited, and the two German soldiers returned from the hills, and they hadn't been killed by the guerrilla fighters. And so they let everyone go. So the men weren't killed in the village. Only my grandmother's brother was killed for running. But in that moment, I'd always thought of it as such a heartbreaking story of like, when there's ruthlessness and heartlessness, there's no right move. You know, he could have stayed with the guys, with the rest of the men, and they all could have perished. He could have run and lived, you know, like when there's heartlessness and absolute brutal hate like there was then it's very hard to know what to do. But in that moment, you're right, he was free. In that moment where he chose to run, he made a choice, you know, and that choice was extremely risky and extremely powerful for him to be like, you know what, even though there's all these soldiers around here and there's 99.9 chance that I'm not going to make it out, I'm still going to run because I deserve to be free. I'm not going to walk to my own death with these guys. And you're right. That moment that we make those decisions. Well, you know, I guess now I make those decisions more metaphorically or differently than a life and death situations because of the privilege that I have. Even though I receive racism in Australia, I don't receive that kind of threat of fearing for my life in front of police officers on a daily or weekly basis, as other people do in this country and in the States and other places as well. But I do, you know, we do, like a metaphor, like you're saying, you know, we do need to make that decision every day, almost, to wake up and be like, I'm going to be free. I'm going to make a decision from the perspective of freedom, and not of fear, and not of wanting to quash myself or deny myself or shrink myself because of what society expects of me, or not to do what, you know, not be afraid to talk out when there's injustice. For me, and I often criticize the Greek community in Australia, because for me, for us to not talk about injustice is in many ways an insult to our ancestors, you know, an insult to my grandmother's brother, to my ancestors that were under Ottoman occupation for 400 years. That was completely brutal. For us to then just watch that same thing go on around us is horrible, is an insult for me to our ancestors. And this week I saw that the Archdiocese, the head of the Greek Orthodox Church in the United States, marched with the Black Lives Matter movement in New York City and Brooklyn. And I was really proud of that moment, even though I know it's not everything and it might just be performative, but it's more than what I've ever seen, really. And he carries on a tradition of another Archdiocese of the United States who marched with Martin Luther King in Selma. He was the only church leader from a non-Black denomination or a non-Black church leader that marched with Martin Luther King at that time. So that's really a part of our lineage, if we choose it to be a part of our lineage, and choosing that freedom, you know, choosing to be like, this is worth walking for, marching for, running for, not buying for, whatever it is, doing it from the perspective of we all deserve to get free.
Yes, yes, I agree 100%.
So what's this new book I hear about? You had an experience in Italy?
Well, yes. I was at the American Academy in Rome doing a writer's residency, and I go to the gym every day, and I found the gym, and I would walk to the gym every day. And 6 days in to the residency, I walked past this military person with a semi-automatic, and he looked at me. Now, this area is in an affluent area, so there's not that many blacks on the streets at all. So he sort of looked at me, and I, went past him and went on to the gym. I came back, he was still there. And interesting, he was guarding the American University. So I walked by him, and he then looked at me, and he put his gun up, put his hand on the trigger, and was telling me to come to him, and asking me for my passport and telling me to come towards him. So my whole thing was probable cause. Why are you stopping me? I'm not doing anything, it was dumb of me, but I just stopped in the street, and I did not want to walk towards him because then, he could shoot and say, he shot because, I was coming at him and he feared for his life. So I just stood there, and he had his gun pointed at me. And it was getting very heated. He was raising his voice, I was raising my voice. He was trying to tell me something in Italian, I was trying to tell him something in English. And I think what de-escalated it was his partner, that was out there, went inside in the university and got someone that spoke English, and they came out. And I guess what he thought I was an illegal African alien. But, again, why would you think that?
And why does that excuse pointing a gun at somebody?
That's right. And so it happened on the Ides of March, the day that, Caesar was reported to be murdered. And so I went back and told some of my colleagues at the American Academy what happened, and, we talked about it. And then a day or two later, the director of the Academy challenged us to create something that about Rome that inspired us. And then there was this musician, he played the piano, and he did a piece on a bridge, and how the music would, go up and then it would go back down. He was, following the bridge and the slope and the shape of the bridge. And I was just so impressed with that. So I had to figure out, what can I do? What can I do? And then I thought back what had happened. It was the Ides of March. Let me, Julius Caesar. I went down to the ruins where supposedly Julius Caesar was stabbed. I started doing more reading, and I said, Shakespeare wrote this as a way to show parallels between what was going on in the Elizabethan period at his time and what was going on in Rome. Power, corruption, those kinds of things, injustice, inequality. And so, and then I read a little more, and I realized that I think the general's name is North, but Shakespeare used his work to write this play. So I said, well, Shakespeare can do it. I can use Shakespeare's work to write about the parallels of what's going on today with that time Roman period as well. So I started doing it, and just about a year and so later, I pretty much finished it. I really loved it. It was very nice. I went through the play 3 or 4 times. I picked out excerpts that were well known around the world, and then other excerpts that inspired me to think and write about certain things. I set up some rules of how I was going to write the poems, and I went about it. And just either I would think of something and then would say, okay, what excerpt would apply here? Or I'd read some excerpts and say, okay, wow, that really inspired me to think about that. And I wrote the book. So it's been getting some good reviews so far.
Yeah, how's it been going? You've released it recently, is that right?
April 6th, the publisher released it.
On my birthday. You didn't even know.
Excuse me?
On my birthday, and you didn't even know.
That's your birthday?
Yeah, man, April 6th.
Oh, okay. Happy birthday.
That's a mad birthday present. I appreciate it. Awesome.
Well, you have to send me your address so I can send you a book.
Yeah.
Yeah, for your birthday.
Mad. And you've gotten some good reviews, and now you're heading to a residency in Crete, in Greece. Is that right?
Yeah, that was a contest that I sent some work in. I'm working in different areas, and now I was, my primary area is that of social inequalities and justice and all that kind of stuff, because it's the closest thing to me. But, I've written stuff, love poems and haikus and things of that nature. So I sent some work to them, love poems to them, and I happen to win the residency. So I'll be spending probably 2 weeks, and I'll extend it, in Greece. As soon as this COVID thing is over. And then I'll head to Italy and Japan after that.
Nice. One thing I really love about your work is not just the clarity of it and the kind of, it feels like so many poets feel like they're weaving something from start to finish. For me, it feels like you're kind of unraveling something from start to finish, that you find a moment to begin with, and then you kind of pick it apart before you get to the end. It feels really powerful to me. And that meticulous way of working, I also see you use in the way that you've been putting your poetry out into the world. It feels very meticulous, very methodical, the way that you've gone about applying for awards, sending your books to all the right places, approaching different festivals or whatever it is. You've really gone at it in a super professional and powerful way, more than I can really say for myself. And I wanted to know, how did that kind of come about? How did you enter this world from being a surgeon to going, I'm going to put a book out, and just going, well, if I'm going to put a book out, I'm going to do it properly. Where did you start? How did that begin?
Well, as I said, friends encouraged me to do the first book, and I was like, no, that's But they encouraged me, they pushed me, they had more faith and belief in me than I had in far more than I had in myself. So, sometimes, and I tell some of my friends, if you don't believe in yourself, if you got people around you that believe very strongly in you, sometimes you have to ride that horse, and until you can get to where you need to be, and you can stand on your own 2 feet and start to believe in yourself. So that's what I did. And I started getting some really good feedback from the first book, and that helped. That gave me a little more courage and drive to keep moving forward. And then I always believe you got to take control of your stuff. You can't let other people do it. You got to take control, because only you are going to do the best. And in the process of taking control, you also learn the process yourself. So for me, I didn't want to get a publisher straight out. I wanted to learn all the parts of publishing a book, from the writing it to the cover design, what fonts to use, what size book, is the optimal book to have out there. Getting an editor, having an editor by my side, it is almost like, like we're like one. You got to have somebody that you trust. You give them rules, and I say, you can do the grammar, the spelling, but the word choices are mine. I live and die by my own word choices.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I have to feel confident. I have to get to a point where I'm confident enough that why choosing this word over this word is important. And I chose this word for a reason. I'm going to stick by it and feel comfortable with that. I can make that choice and say, that's it. I'm good with that. It may not have been the best choice in the world, but it was for me, and I can live with that and learn from it. So that was also an important part of it, having the right editor, graphic design person. And so I just learned to do it, and then just started researching festivals and just sending information out. And interesting enough, my first festival ever was Uber.
Was Uber?
Nice. Yes, that was the first one ever. They wrote me back and they said, we have basically closed the acceptance. We're not accepting any more people or anything like that. And I remember what she said. I remember today. She said, normally, I was ready. I was ready to give you the speech I give everyone in terms of narrative. And she said, there was just something about your stuff that I couldn't say no to you. So, and then she wrote me and she said, if you can get here, we'll take care of the rest. Your lodging, food, and all that stuff. And I was on the plane. And it was, I think it was, I know it was something that I needed at that point in my career because, and I'm going to tell you this, you did a lot for me. I tell you, you're one of the best poets in the world. Your stuff is amazing. The way you present is amazing. The way you carry yourself. And so, I was just totally inspired by that whole experience with you. And I listened to your stuff even after for years. I would just listen to it. I even wrote a poem about you. I don't know if you remember, and stole some of your lines.
Man, I appreciate that. It means a lot to me, bro. It really means a lot to me, man. I appreciate that.
And do you remember the poetry, spoken word poetry that we had at the Indonesia?
The slam that I hosted?
Yes.
Oh my God, do I remember it? It was a marathon. I was like, I'll host it, but only if there's no more than, you can't have more than 20, 23 poets at a slam, otherwise it gets tiring. They're like, yeah, no worries. And I think there was like 40 poets or something by the end. I was just like,
it wasn't that bad. But the funny thing was, you told the gentleman to throw out the highs and the lows numbers.
Yeah.
And he threw out all my tens. And so I didn't make it to this.
Oh man.
And at the last minute you figured it out.
Yeah, I was like, no, Neal did really well. That's not his score. They're like, yeah, you told us to throw out the top score and the bottom score. So he got 3 10s, so we threw out all 3 10s. Poor dudes, man. Poor guys. They were just like locals helping out, and they just got thrown in there, and there was a language barrier, and it was in front of everyone, and I was on the microphone saying things to them, trying not to get upset. And
you made it seamless. But
man,
that was a beautiful time for me. It was a wonderful time.
It was one of those festivals that I really remember well, and one of those festivals that I met people that I'm still in contact with, and that's probably the best thing about a festival. I think the best kind of intangible result of a good festival is you met some people and they influenced you, and you stay connected, and it's good vibes.
Yeah.
So, man, I think it'd be amazing to wrap up with one of your pieces from your collections. Is this from the new book?
No, this is from, I think it's from Where Do I Sit? And then this is the title of a Japanese version of a translation of some of my work too. We used this title for the title of the book, The Weight of Just Black. Ready?
I'm ready. So this is The Weight of Just Black by Neal Hall.
It is not the weight of black, but the immensity of being made to be just black every time white confronts me. It is the weight of white's derivation of black, a derivative definition of just black derived in part by the social conditions created in large part by whites. It is the stress and strain of an inexact, inaccurate depiction to foster an ill-conceived, preconceived description of an ill-meaning distinction of black nature, black imagery, black sounds, the scope of black, derivatives of black derived, reconstituting me by white society to be just black. It is the immensity of immediate suspicion, the first sight of me through aqua blue seas of constricting pupils, narrowing their circular misgivings like a hangman's rope hung about my black throat. It is the weight of torque and tension and muscles and tendons, poised white flight or fright, posture to iPhone militarized police who serve and protect white and red line, black free zones. It is the weighted density and white tone when switching from speaking to a white to just a black. It is the lift of an entitled nose, the flaring of nostrils, a glaring view through a narrowed view through slits in mist, trusting eyelids. It is the enormous weight of hate when they clutch their loosely held Gucci handbags, the first sight of me. The locking of the car doors, the first sight of me. The collecting of the brood frolicking in aisles of department stores, the first sight of me. The gravity of familiarity referring to me, renaming me, what's up, my man, the first sight of me. It is the insanity of in and nigger black, subhuman black, green light black to shoot blacks in the back, concealing it, tracing the slain outlines of black and crime scene tape of plausible alibis and deniabilities, concealing falling shadows of black and lines that divide, sever white society from just black, weighted to be just black, a derivative of me derived, reconstituting me by white society to be just black.
Oof. Amazing, man. Holy hell. Whew, that's a powerful piece.
Just
very powerful. Man, you're beyond keeping up with me. That's so powerful, man. So powerful. You really, you know, a lot of my work is I find a metaphor and I just can't let it go. And you really, you held on to those colors and you really took, you know, you sucked out every last bit of juice of the bones, of the marrow of those bones of that concept, man. It's really beautiful.
It means a lot to me coming from you, because as I tell everybody, when they say, who is your poet, who do you read? I always say you, always. Your stuff is just off the chart.
I appreciate it, man.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. I'm so glad we got to connect on those fateful days many years ago, and that we get to reconnect now via distance. And, you know, the process of this podcast, the idea is that I have these inspirational conversations with people like yourself, and then I go away and have to write something about, you know, inspired from our conversation, and then I record it at the end of the podcast. So I'm excited to see what it is that comes from here. Or if I don't write something, I choose something that I've already written and I use it as a response to what's transpired in the conversation. So I'm looking forward to really sitting with this. I'll listen through it again and I'll come up with some kind of a response, and I'm looking forward to that as well, man.
Same here, my friend.
Thank you so much for your time, bro.
Thank you. I appreciate you asking.
And thanks for coming to the show.
All right. Love you.
Love you too, bro.